Hello, everyone, and welcome to the North Carolina Museum of History and the 21st Annual African American Cultural Celebration. Our presenter will begin in just a moment, but we want to start with a few notes. Please remember to ask questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to respond to them and share with our presenter. Please note that our presenters and off-camera crew are masked for the safety of everyone. We would like to thank the following sponsors of the North Carolina Museum of History Foundation who have helped to make this event possible.
My name is Earl Imes, your host for the History, Film, and Enterprise Forum, where we have a very exciting lineup. As your farmer and historian and curator of African American and agricultural history at the North Carolina Museum of History, we are happy to present this year's theme of environmental justice, Black people, green planet. Our first presenter, Mr. Bill Myers, is the founding director of the Oliver Nestus Freeman Roundhouse Museum in Wilson, North Carolina. The museum, which preserves, promotes, and presents African American history, art, and culture to the citizens of Wilson, North Carolina, and beyond. Let's begin with a short video introduction about the museum by that founding director, Mr. Bill Myers.
Hi, my name is Bill Myers. I am the founder and director of the Oliver Nestus Freeman Roundhouse and African American Museum, located in Wilson, North Carolina. Being a former educator, I learned many years ago that there's a terrific void in our books about African American history, notoriously left out. People like Carter G. Woodson that tried many years to get Negro History Week, which later turned into Black History Month. But I knew firsthand that much of our history was just missing. And I wanted to do something about it locally because we had so many people who had worked so hard locally to make Wilson what it is today. So I learned that there was an abandoned house here in Wilson, a house built by a man named Oliver Nestus Freeman. And people had actually lived in the house, but it was abandoned. And I thought, what a wonderful idea to make that house an African American museum, even as tiny as it happened to be. So I went to the city council and suggested to them that they vote in the affirmative to move that house to a vacant lot here and make it an African American museum. Oliver Nestus Freeman, born in 1882, the son of a person who had been enslaved in this country. When the slaves were freed and at the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863. But some states like Texas said they didn't get the message. So some slaves were not freed until 1865, the ending of the Civil War. Well, when they were freed, the practice at the time was to let the enslaved person have the name of the person who owned them, or they could choose their own name. Well, Mr. Freeman, he chose the name Freeman. That's what he wanted to be. And he had a son in 1882, and he named him Oliver Nestus here. Oliver Nestus grew up and was an outstanding student, a person who wanted to help other people, and he had an interest in laying bricks and stones. In fact, a very unique ability that he could make things out of anything, and he was just anxious to make things all the time. He'd go to the beaches up in Manio and pick up seashells and come back and make something from them. Those examples are all around this museum, things that he made. Well, he had an idea he wanted to build a house and several other houses at the end of World War II. World War II ended in 1945. And so sometime around 1946, he decided he wanted to build a very unique house, a round house, a house made of glass. But it was his wife who said, "Oliver, nobody wants to live in a glass house. Don't do that." So he scrounged up materials, rocks, bricks, stones, wire, and everything to make a round house. She said, "Why a round house?" She said, "Well, I'm basing it out of things I've read about in Africa, the huts that they live in. If the house is round, that means there's no seams in the house, so the snakes can't get into the house. So I want to make a round house." So he made this house and had 3 rooms in it. The examples of it are on the wall here: a living room, a kitchen, and a bedroom here, right here. And he made it out of things like pine trees all around the room. He used tobacco sticks, materials that he scrounged up to make a house. He did it so well that people actually moved in this house and lived in this house, in this 3-room house, about 800 square feet. But people saw his skills and appreciated his work and asked him to build other houses. So there's several homes that people still live in here in Wilson right now. He built the Lutheran church that's at the entranceway of Barton College here in town. The monument at the Wilson Fairgrounds. The floor at the train station here, all built by Oliver Nestus Freeman. He went to Tuskegee, became very friendly with the founder, Booker T. Washington. In fact, when Booker T came to Wilson, he made sure he would stay with Oliver Nestus. But he became famous for his work. So people wanted to hire him all over the state, in California, other places in North Carolina, and as I said, several places here in Wilson. He had a zoo in his backyard. He had 6 bears, 6 cub bears. He'd walk them down the street, and people thought he was kind of a weird person for doing that. But he had dogs, he had peacocks, he had flying squirrels, he had snakes, and people would actually go to his house and visit here and play with his animals. But he was an entrepreneur also, because his store right across the street, he'd sell things like peanuts and things that you could go back and actually feed his animals over here. He wanted to do things for this community. The house was moved here in the year 1999. It became a community effort. We opened the museum in the year 2001, and people started to bring us things that they had maybe stored in the attics for years, things that we wanted. And I thought that it would be a wonderful idea to not only have a museum, but to have it a resource center. There's so many things that our kids had never seen before that they needed to know about, and the people who helped make Wilson what it is. We discovered things like there had been a black-owned newspaper in this city of Wilson back in 1897. Black-owned and operated, paper called the Wilson Blade. Lady happened to have an original copy of this newspaper at her home. And she came by and she said, "I know this is something you'd love to have." I said, "I'd love to have it." She said, "But I can't give it to you." I said, "Well, then please let me make a copy of it." So we went down to Staples or someplace and had a copy made, and I had to put in this fiberglass thing in here so people would realize that there were entrepreneurs even back there in 1800s and 1897 like this is. And this particular paper was called the Wilson Blade. And so this is why this museum is so important. We started getting so many artifacts and things in here. We got so many things that we said, hey, we need more space. And so in 2018, we opened a brand new museum that contains a whole lot more than we could put in the little room over here. But there were people out here, farmers and everybody else, who helped to shape this place. And I just don't want to see to forget those. That's the part that bothers me most, I think, is when people work so hard to do good, and then after they die, 2 weeks later, they're forgotten. And I just don't want that. There's so many stories, the stories all over this place and another museum about people who worked to pave these streets, to get better education, to get school buses, to get food, all those kinds of things, to get health things. People who worked hard, people who were threatened. I mean, people who had crosses burned in the yards and all those kinds of things, but they persevered and said, no, this is good. You are now in the African American Museum. Now, that was opened in year 2018. We started getting so many artifacts for the small roundhouse that we needed more space. So we went back to City Council after we'd had a fundraiser and said, we need more space, and I want your permission to start construction on a new building. And but we're short in our funds. We have raised over $200,000, but we need an additional $100,000 to make this a reality. So, to my surprise, they voted unanimously that night. City Council voted to give us $100,000 so this project could be started, and it was completed, and we entered the building in 2018. For many, many years, back in 1840, there was no such place as Wilson. It was a crossroads here, but the railroad was already here. So it was a very important part of Edgecombe County. Well, in 1849, it was incorporated and called Wilson in honor of the General Lewis Dickens Wilson. He was a state senator from Edgecombe County. He was fought and died in the Mexican War. And so that started in 1849. But over the course of the years, and this takes us up to 1970, all these things, important facts that happened in here. And a lot of it was done by African American persons in our community in here. Men from the Men's Civic Club, in medicine, in music, in religion, and all those things, in education. And all these things that were made possible by a lot of people who worked so hard, and they are depicted in those pictures up here. Come with me now as we talk about things that happened in here. In the year 1912, Booker T. Washington actually came to Wilson in here, came down on the train. This gentleman, a gentleman in Kansas, had this collage here and said, I got something that I bet you'd love to have. And he said, I'll sell it to you for $3,000. Well, we didn't have $3,000, so I said, we'd love to have it, but we can't afford it. So we negotiated with him. He said, well, if you can, are you a 501c3? We said, yes, we are. And if you will give me some tax credit on this, I'll let you have it for $1,000. And so we were able to get this big picture of Booker T. Washington. And he came here, coming to the main auditorium here now, he came here to talk to outstanding citizens from the state. And they met here on Green Street in Sam Vick's yard, and up here they have pictures of those celebrities that he brought to Wilson. People like Booker T. Washington himself was here, but C.C. Spalding and Sam Shepard and all those people were actually here in Wilson, and they met to talk about the future of blacks in America. There's a copy of the speech that he made over here. There's a copy of him right there. Here's a picture of Booker T. himself in the middle of a conference, and we labeled these things and we put numbers on them so that you could come over here and find out who was here, who attended that summit meeting in here. That's Booker T. Washington right there. Oliver Nestus Freeman is up there also. But these persons came here to learn the future of blacks in America. But he came to talk about people learning trades, learning brick masonry, stone masonry, and carpentry, and those kinds of things on that. And this is a copy of the speech that he made in here. They met at Sam Vick's home. Sam Vick was the first black postmaster in Wilson. An entrepreneur, an educator, a principal, a teacher, a politician, but he became postmaster under President Buchanan, who appointed him as Postmaster General in here. But his house still exists on Green Street right here in Wilson. There's a picture of East Wilson in here. And this is a map of Wilson back in 1908. There's a picture of what Nash Street used to look like. It was a business area. There were doctor's offices down there, movie theaters, and all that located right down in the 500 block of Nash Street. And this is what it looked like in here back in 1908. There's a train track right there, and mostly blacks on one side and whites on the other side. And that was the way of life during that time. But Booker T came to talk about getting along with people and making things happen and learning a trade. So consequently, when he left, people started getting to the trade courses in the schools. And they were actually teaching brick mason and things like that in the schools. Many people in the Freeman family were part of that teaching effort in there. We were able to find many of the tools that Oliver Nestus Freeman used. They're up on the walls up here, as you see, lined up on the walls down here. We had to highlight, I guess is the word, certain individuals who had done so much in the county. For an example, this gentleman here, this is G.K. Butterfield Sr. This is the father of our congressman. But he came here and there were no blacks in government in any way. And so he said he wanted to run for the Board of Aldermen at that time. And he ran for the office, and when the votes were tallied, there was a tie vote between him and another gentleman. Well, the procedure for breaking the tie during that time was to put both names in the hat, get a child to come in and pull a name from the hat, and that's how it happened. A little girl, 5 years old, named Deborah Watson, came in and pulled out G.K. Butterfield Sr.'s name in here, and that's how he became a part of city government, like that. Fanny Corbett, who insisted that blacks needed decent housing. They needed a place to stay. They would take better care if they owned the house. So the whole area, Adventura East of Wilson on Highway 264, really responsible, provided by this lady, Fanny Corbett. And these are people who made significant achievements here in Wilson. And we have to continue this effort. And that's why this place is so important to me. I don't want that spirit to die. I just can't, I can't do that. That people need to know about people like Fanny Corbett and John Jones and all these other folks and Dr. Butterfield who worked and sacrificed our own life sometimes to make things better for people today. You had to crank it up. That's the best we could do at one time.
Wow, that was a great tour of the Oliver Nestus Freeman Roundhouse Museum by founding director, Mr. Bill Myers. What a treasure. I can't wait to get back down there. And we have Mr. Myers live in studio here today. And thank you, Mr. Myers, again, for all that you do in the community and in the state. What a treasure. Can you just tell us what was, again, I know we saw it in the video, but the idea and the impetus behind creating the museum?
Sure, and let me thank you for having me here today. I need to tell you a little bit about my background, first of all. I have been a teacher, an assistant principal, a principal of a high school, the principal of a middle school, and I retired as assistant superintendent of personnel in Wilson County Schools. I say that because I can say firsthand that so much of the history of African Americans in this country has been omitted from textbooks, some on purpose, and consequently our kids don't know a lot of things that happen. And so when I saw the opportunity to create a museum that so that our youth could remember or could learn about our past and our seniors could be reminded, I think that's extremely important, that we don't forget where we've come from. If you don't know your history, your future is going to be certainly sometimes in doubt. But that was the impetus behind doing this. It's become a labor of love. We're doing this, and people are coming from around the world basically to see the museum. But I want it there so that we can remember those persons who made things happen for us today.
What a wonderful inspiration. I know the museum, I've had an opportunity to experience it myself, and as a museum person and one who likes to visit museums, I really appreciate what you are doing to preserve not only the academic and the textual and the 3D history and the two-dimensional photographs and documents, but the building itself, the preservation of the roundhouse and the effort that it takes and that it has taken to literally move that house to a new foundation and keep it restored. Just tell us a little bit about that labor of love.
That's a great question, and I'm happy to answer that, because what happened with that, once we had got the house moved, it became a community project. And that's what I really loved about it. It brought people from all aspects of life in Wilson coming by to say, I want to help. And I loved that. A gentleman named George Kennedy was walking down the street and saw what we were doing. And he came over and said, I want to help do this. He said, it's going to need some paint, so I'll paint it for you free of charge. He bought the paint and did the labor. The teachers from Sally B. Howard School in Wilson came over and said, we're going to need some landscaping. They came over, bought the plants, and planted the plants. A group of students from all the way from Pennsylvania heard about our project and came down on a bus on a Saturday morning, worked all day in digging out the walkways, and went back to Pennsylvania the same night. Companies like Whitley's Electric said, well, it's going to need wiring. So we'll do that for you, free of charge. Spray Tech Insulation said, we'll do the installation for you, free of charge. And so that to me was so important that we brought people together. Sometimes people got it confused and said we were trying to do some things that would maybe separate the races. And I said, that is totally untrue. We're not trying to separate anything. We're trying to get people to learn more about each other so that we can get along better. And that's what it's all about. So when the community people came, they started making donations. They started coming to work. And the city of Wilson worked. They sent the people over to help redo the roof, to install the windows and the doors. People just volunteered all over, and I thought that was really a plus for all of that.
Well, history divisive? No, but history and historic preservation is great for the nation.
Exactly.
And I can't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough for being an inspiration and being the motivating force behind the establishment of this treasure, not only again in Wilson, North Carolina, the Roundhouse Museum, in Eastern North Carolina, and as you mentioned, beyond, people literally from around the globe coming down Interstate 95 to Wilson, North Carolina. I know one of the things as a historian that really caught my eye on my first visit there was that you had a black newspaper, an 8-page Wilson Blade from 1897. And having checked those sources at the time, it had not even been documented until I discovered it at your museum, and we took it over to the Southern Historical Collection at UNC Chapel Hill, and now digital copies are available. But I understand that a second 1897 Wilson Blade has surfaced in the community. And to your point, this is a direct result of people having heard about the first rediscovered Wilson Blade. So hopefully you and I can continue to collaborate on these efforts to collect these artifacts and documents and photographs and oral histories, material culture into that wonderful repository and museum that you have. You know, I would be remiss, and I think you're being really modest today, Mr. Bill Myers, because many people know you also as a world famous musician. And for those who don't know, Mr. Bill Myers has literally been endued with the gift of music, both in production and actually playing the music. As he mentioned, in Wilson, North Carolina is his home, and in 1957, he started a group called the Monitors. And that started a whole wave of music during the 50s and 60s, where here at the North Carolina Museum of History, we had the opportunity to actually include his work in exhibits like Hey America, Eastern North Carolina and the Birth of Funk Music, as well as the recent beach music exhibit, which talked about that unique experiences both in Eastern North Carolina and our beach. But again, I would like to bring Mr. Bill Myers to you, 2014 North Carolina Heritage Award winner, and he is gonna take us out with a bang. Now, before we do that, and while he gets prepared, we'll take some questions from the chat.
So we do have a busy chat. We have a lot of praise for Mr. Myers and everything he's doing at the Roundhouse Museum. We have a question about the resources that he used to create the history panels.
So the resources that you use to create the history panels that are on the walls at the museum?
So can you share for Darlena a little bit about the resources you used?
We have been fortunate enough to have, and I'm going to call her name. She probably don't want me to do this. But we have a historian who lives in Wilson, who's born in Wilson, who lives in Atlanta, Georgia right now. Her name is Lisa Henderson. She's an attorney in Atlanta. And Lisa has been wonderful about fact-checking these kinds of things, making sure all the facts are correct. And she's done all the research for us. Our job then was to find someone to put them on the panels. And so my good friend Betsy Peters was available. She has a business in Zebulon, North Carolina, to actually put them on panels so we could display. After getting the information, the next job is to display them properly. And so between the two of them, we've had a great deal of success.
Great, that's a great question. Thank you.
We have one more question. Again, we've got lots of praise, so it's kind of hard to like weed through everything, but Anne wants to know, does Mr. Myers know about the work of master brick mason James Vester Miller in Asheville? He died in 1940, but his work years would have overlapped with those of Mr. Freeman.
I'm not aware of it, maybe.
Well, yes, I am aware of Mr. James Vester Miller. He is a builder in Asheville, North Carolina, about 100 years ago. He was born around 1860, and he built some of the most fine buildings in Asheville during the same time frame that Oliver Nestus Freeman also was building work out of stone. And interestingly enough, we've had James Vester Miller's granddaughter here at the African American Cultural Celebration from 2014, where she has photographs and history of not only his structures, many of them that still exist in Asheville, North Carolina, but also a photographic history of Asheville, North Carolina. So thank you again, and that was a wonderful question.
We have another comment from Anne, just to share with everyone. Miller's granddaughter has created a walking trail of some of the many buildings that he built in downtown Asheville and beyond. So that's good to know. And then Michael was asking, are there references in your museum to Charles H. Darden, who was perhaps the first licensed Black mortician?
Oh, yes. Yes, Charles H. Darden is all over the museum. The school was named for him. He was a mortician in Wilson, and there's a great deal of information. In fact, talking about people who volunteered things in the community, another gentleman came by and gave us a laptop computer, and it is full of information about Mr. Darden and Darden School.
That is a wonderful resource, and thank you for getting that collection into the museum.
So once again, lots of appreciation in the chat for everything you're doing for local Wilson history. And I will turn it over to Earl.
Thank you, Kathy. And thank you again. And we have a real treat. Mr. Myers was so gracious at the 21st Annual African American Culture Celebration here at the North Carolina Museum of History. He's brought some of his musical instruments where he will serenade us and take us out in first-class style. Thank you, Mr. Myers.
Turn it up a little bit so I can hear it. I can hear it. Oh.
All right, Mr. Bill Myers. Yes. Big hand for Mr. Bill Myers, founding director of the Oliver Nestus Freeman Roundhouse Museum, 2014 North Carolina Heritage Award winner, and all-around treasure. Thank you, Mr. Bill Myers, and thank you for all that you do. How can people reach you and contact you at the museum?
We're listed on Facebook at thefreemanroundhouse.com. You can take a virtual tour of the museum with that same website.
Very good, thank you. And you can also log in to ncmuseumofhistory.org and see this wonderful program at your leisure. Thank you again for joining us at the 21st Annual African American Cultural Celebration at the North Carolina Museum of History.
Once again, thank you all so much for joining us for this session with Mr. Bill Myers. Be sure to watch some live performances taking place throughout the day, which are screening on our website, nc-aacc.com. And thank you so much for joining us for the 21st Annual African American Cultural Celebration, which continues today until 5 o'clock. Thank you all.